Hi, I'm Diane Paulus. I'm the director of the Gershwins Porgy and Bess. I'm also the artistic director of the American Repertory Theater at Harvard University, where we originated this production. As part of the process of creating this revival, I taught a course at Harvard University about the cultural and social history of this great American masterpiece. The video you're about to watch will give you an overview of what this course dealt with and how it introduced this work to young college students.
We went into the history of Porgy and Bess. These pictures on the upper left are Dorothy and DuBose Hayward. DuBose Hayward wrote a novel in 1925. He was the son of an aristocratic family who had lost all their money. He spent time working on the fishing wharf in Charleston, being very close to the African American population on that fishing wharf, and he wrote the novel Porgy in 1925. And this was considered a radical novel written by a white man, radical because it was going inside the culture and giving you a taste of black life. It was heralded as a very successful critical novel in 1925. His wife, Dorothy, was saying to him, "You should make this into a play." And he said, no, it's a novel, it's having a success at the novel, let's just leave well enough alone. Well, like any good wife, she went ahead and wrote the play herself. And she showed it to him, and he said, "This is not so bad." And so they officially undertook the co-authoring of the play version of Porgy, also called Porgy, which premiered on Broadway in 1927. And part of this course was actually educating our students about American theater history, which I feel we know so little about. Indeed, when I started on this project, I had no idea there was a play called Porgy that premiered on Broadway in the 20s. Throughout this period, Gershwin was searching for source material to write what he had called, in his dreams, the great American folk opera. And he got a hold of the novel of Porgy and famously read it in one sitting overnight, wrote a letter to DuBose Hayward and said, "I want to use your novel as the source for my great American folk opera." So here we see a picture of George Gershwin on your right here, and his brother Ira, who wrote the lyrics. They started to work on this in 1933, so after the play had been performed. And the production of the opera premiered here in Boston in 1935 at the Colonial Theater. So when we did our production, it was a major anniversary of this history coming back to Boston. I should just pause for a second and say that DuBose Hayward co-authored the libretto of the opera. So while we always remember Ira Gershwin as the lyricist, DuBose Hayward is really the unsung author. In fact, the lyrics to Summertime belong to DuBose Hayward. It was a very collaborative team effort, so it's usually not itemized who wrote what, but that's a little fact. And also another fact is the opera was largely based on the structure of the play. But of course, Dorothy was unrecognized in the credits for the opera throughout its history in America until our production here at the ART on Broadway, where she is now credited in the creation of the libretto. This picture is of the original Porgy and Bess. That's Todd Duncan and Anne Brown. And Anne Brown was a young Juilliard student. She was, barely 20. Gershwin plucked her out of Juilliard. She had never acted professionally in her life. Gave her this role. Todd Duncan, classically trained singer who, anecdotes you could read of coming to Gershwin's house in New York, and he really didn't want to bother with this. Gershwin seduced him, played the score for him. He also legendarily wept when he heard Gershwin play the score at his piano at his house and agreed to take on the role. A piece of incredible history with Todd Duncan and Anne Brown. This production, as I said, premiered in Boston. It went on to New York in the fall of 1935, and it didn't do so well. It played for about 8 weeks. Critical response was mixed. All the theater people said, "Why are they singing like that?" All the opera people said, "That's not really opera." You have to appreciate George Gershwin was a mashup artist way ahead of his time. He was hanging out with Albarn Berg and Fats Waller. That was his sonic universe. And he was feeling deeply misunderstood. He went on to die within 2 years and never knew the success of this opera. And you have to appreciate, this was the first opera he wrote. And if you think about, like, who can name the first opera that Mozart wrote or Verdi wrote? You usually don't write your masterpiece right out of the gate. So there he is, depressed, and the opera goes on to a national tour in 1936. It goes to Pittsburgh and Chicago and Philadelphia, and then finally ends up at the National Theater in Washington, D.C. The cast arrives, and the theater is segregated. And Todd Duncan says, well, we have a problem here. We're not going to perform this to a segregated house, in a segregated house. So the producers at the National Theater said, oh, well, we'll fix that. How about the second balcony upstairs will be open for black people? And Todd Duncan said, no, you don't understand. That's not good enough. So the producers got a little more nervous, and then they finally said, we've got a solution. Wednesday and Saturday matinees will be for black people. He said, not good enough yet again. And by this time, Anne Brown had joined his side, and the whole cast went on a strike, and they were threats to fine them for breaching their contract. They didn't relent. And in March of 1936, the National Theater in Washington, D.C. was desegregated for the first time in its history. This was a very famous production with William Warfield as Bess, Porgy, sorry, and Leontine Price as Bess. It went out on tour in the 50s. It was funded by the State Department, and Porgy and Bess was the diplomatic export of American culture in the 50s. And this cast went all over to Moscow and Prague and Vienna, and they were touted by all the heads of states and had glorious, glamorous parties at embassies. And what was so interesting is all the people in Russia and around the world couldn't believe that at these cast parties, Leontine Price would stand up in her mink coat and sing Italian love songs. And of course, that was shocking to them, their exposure to this culture. And then Cab Calloway, who was also on this tour playing Sporting Life, would keep them up partying all night long. They were kind of the rock stars of their time touring with this production. It was a contradiction, because while they were being heralded as the great export of American culture, obviously back in America things were not as free and open for African Americans. And actually Anne Brown, that actress who played Bess, went on to settle and spend her life as an expat in Norway. She felt she could not have a career in America. So she finished her life and career as a singer in Norway. This was the next sort of major mark for Porgy and Bess in the 20th century. The movie in 1959 that Sidney Poitier starred in. It was a controversial film. Sidney Poitier has written openly in his memoirs that he regretted making the film, and he did it because he was coerced by his agent to do this film so he could get another film. And it was criticized as romanticizing life on Catfish Row and Hollywoodizing life on Catfish Row. And actually, for many years, you couldn't see this film. It was pulled from circulation. We were able to get it and screened it with the students. The students learned the history. They read the novel, they read the play, they listened to the opera, they screened the film, and they also went into the Harvard Theater Collection, and they had an exercise of looking at all the research that we have here on campus of many of the original playbills and articles, and they all did annotated case work on archive research from the Harvard Theater Collection. And as I said earlier, they also participated in the vision for our production, and this is the creative team that worked on the Gershwins Porgy and Bess, the musical at the ART. Susan Laurie Parks, the first African-American woman to win the Pulitzer Prize for drama, Deirdre Murray, an Obie Award-winning composer who did the musical adaptations, and Ron Brown, who's an incredible choreographer. Evidence is his dance company. He did all the movement for the show. I just want to end by saying it was so interesting hearing from the students. They brought in visual inspiration on what they thought the set design should look like. They came in and described to me how they would stage scenes. A snapshot into one very particular course of collaboration between theater and literature, social and cultural history. Thank you.